Welcome to Planet Poet Words in Space. I'm your host, Sharon Israel, and I'm so happy to welcome to the show Bruce McPherson, the founding director of the award-winning McPherson and Company, a literary and arts publishing house, who will present and read from his compelling and award-winning catalog of books. Pamela Manche Pierce, Planet Poet's erudite poet at large, will join us later in the program. Hi, Bruce. How are you, Bruce?
Hello.
I'm so glad you're here. Here's some information about Bruce and McPherson and Company. In 1974, Bruce McPherson founded McPherson and Company, an independent literary and arts publishing house in Providence, Rhode Island. Bruce relocated the press 3 years later to Kingston, New York, in the Hudson Valley. McPherson and Company has been a full-time project since 1984 and has issued roughly 150 editions of more than 100 titles by authors from around the country and around the world. McPherson and Company was named Forward Review's 2010 Independent Publisher of the Year. Press has won numerous other awards, including Community of Literary Magazines and Press's Lord Knows Award in 2017, the National Book Award for Fiction, 2010 for Lord of Misrule, and among many others. And for the novel Sea of Hooks, the Gold IPPY Literary Fiction Prize in 2015. IPPY is Independent Publisher Book Awards. And Sea of Hooks also won the Penn Center USA Fiction Award 2014. Sea of Hooks was also the Chautauqua Prize finalist of 2014 and was listed as one of the top 10 books of the year in New York Magazine and Publishers Weekly. You've helped me sample a few of these excerpts, a few of these fabulous books. I was blown away by the beauty of the language of these books. Would you read an excerpt from Weight of Smoke, one of your publications?
Very happily. Okay, just to set it up, this is a historical novel that is about the founding of Jamestown, and it is in the voice of Captain John Smith. This is by George Robert Minkoff. Chapter 1. So begins the disquiet of this Eden. We were alone. The Chesapeake Bay held us in its cup. Under the moon, the water ran milk-white. I touched its wetness, mesmerized by the surface. It shattered into darkness, the pellets of light now reforming the confused image of my hand. Someone groaned. Quiet. My order was a whisper. There was a movement in the barge, a voice. What, Smith? Nothing. Go to sleep. I watched a wisp of cloud pass, darkening the land and its silhouette. I could almost taste its vapor. I closed my eyes, searching my brain for a memory of light. One of our gentlemen was smoking a pipe. Its smoke glowed as if born to ghost above the river. Its whiteness flowed beyond the barge. I smelled its sweet sting. In the morning, our backs were bent again against our oars. There were 20 of us in the barge, heading north up a river of no name. Weight upon weakness, we pulled upon the heave of waters to explore for a few days into the west. The scintillations of the river glowed in a golden mirror. We to discover perhaps the passage to the Western Sea. Our orders to make good prospects in trade and alliances with the savages, while the other 87 of our company unloaded our small fleet. Those 3 ships, our only protection, their cannons, our sentries, their wooden hulls, our forts, and they soon to sail for England. It was May 1607. Only 3 days earlier, we had landed in Virginia and founded, at great expense and not inconsiderable danger, Jamestown. The name of our king to grace a flat of sands now strewn with the barrels of our supplies. Soon the river, too, would bear our sovereign's name. We had come as England, and England was not another Spain. Sweetly, We had brought our salvations to these shores. Spain had come to the New World to find slaves and easy wealth. We had come to build a single nation from the nations. The enslaved would be our allies. We would war against a heathen Spain with kindness. I throbbed with mission. All human enterprises are enterprises of conversion. I wished to be the expedition, to be transformed, to live action without thought, to become one with this great enterprise, to be its instrument. What need I of thought? I am of Drake.
Wow. That's Bruce McPherson, the publisher of McPherson and Company, reading from The Weight of Smoke by George Minkoff. And Minkoff is Berkshire's author of a trilogy of historical novels about Jamestown, as you said. It's very lyric prose. Did that strike you, Bruce, when you were reading the manuscript and deciding whether to publish it?
Well, sure. It's not exactly 17th century or early 17th century prose, but it's close. Oh. It got a little bit of the flavor, a little Shakespearean aspect to it. And George really worked quite hard to accomplish that without making it too dense or too obscure. And he wanted to get to depict the real thinking, the thoughts behind the explorers who found Jamestown, why they came, and what their mental landscape was.
I was struck. I read a little bit about John Smith's colorful history. He was a pirate and a mercenary and even a Turkish slave before he led the venture to the New World. I found that very, very interesting. This wasn't some green person sailing for the first time, anything like that. Would you talk a little bit about that?
He was a soldier. He had been a mercenary in the wars in Europe, various wars, or at least so he tells us. And Minkoff did an enormous amount of research from a number of sources. There are some standard sources, Halkut and others, but Smith himself wrote extensively, and it's not very well known that Smith was one of the best-selling authors of his time.
Really?
Yeah, he wrote a number of books.
That's great.
And he was sort of the Roger Peterson of his time. I mean, he was which probably didn't. It helped in some ways, but he was also considered boastful and acting above his station, which got him into trouble from the very get-go. On the voyage over, he more or less took command. He had sealed orders from the company that directed the 3 ships to Virginia. For that, he was nearly sentenced to death upon arrival. But then they realized they needed him more than they needed anybody else, because only he had the necessary experience. There were 2 classes of people. The one were the workers, both sailors and the enlisted people. And then there was a class of gentlemen who more or less were stakeholders in the company, the English company. And they didn't work. They just took their privilege and wore it very boldly on their sleeves.
Thank you, Bruce. I wanted to ask you about how you started the press, but first you brought up the melding of the workers and the enlisted men, and I found that probably is very applicable to Lord of Misrule, the next book I wanted you to read from. And I was looking up what the Lord of Misrule means, and it possibly is Shakespearean or refers to the 12th night with masters and servants switching roles. Would you tell us a little bit about Lord of Misrule before you read an excerpt from it?
Well, Lord of Misrule is the title of the book, but it's
Right.
also the name of a horse.
Ah,
And so that's the real secret. But of course it does mean the world turned upside down. The
okay.
reversal, instead of being the subservient horse, the horse is more or less a master. And
Okay.
and in fact, the book is filled with reversals and plays with the personalities of the horses. This is a very accurate depiction of a second-class racetrack. This is a racetrack in West Virginia. It's a half-mile track. It's not, one of the big racetracks, like where the Preakness is. Instead, it's where there used to be tracks like this all over the country, in many towns throughout the Midwest and the East. And so this is a story about a young woman whose boyfriend is a trainer, and they bring some horses, and their idea is to make a killing by presenting these horses as not very worthy, and yet having some of them succeed. In other words, there's a certain amount of trickery going on.
Right. So the odds would be against them, but they were really good horses.
Yeah, right. So it's sort of bait and switch, and that's the life on those tracks, even today, although there are far fewer. And the book opens from the perspective or point of view of Medicine Ed, who is he's not a trainer exactly, but he's a doper. He dopes the horses, or he fixes them. He makes it so that they can run, and he's been doing this for a long time. And he's a black man, and so he has a lower status at this time. This is perhaps the late 60s, or actually mid 60s, that these events are taking place. So I'll just read these a couple of paragraphs.
Thank you, Bruce.
And you'll get a sense of it. Inside the back gate of Indian Mound Downs, a hot walking machine creaked round and round. In the judgment of Medicine Ed, walking a horse himself on the shed row of Barn Z, the going nowhere contraption must be the lost soul of this cheap racetrack where he had ended up at. It was stuck there in the gate, so you couldn't get out. It filled the whole road between a hill of horse manure against the backside fence, stubbled with pale, dirty straw like a penitentiary haircut, and a long red puddle in the red dirt, a puddle that was almost a pond. Right down to the sore horses at each point of the silver star, it resembled some woe-begone carnival ride, some skeleton of a two-bit ride dreamed up by a dreamer too tired to dream. There had been no rain all August, and by now the fresh-worked horses were half lost in the pink cloud of their own shuffling. Red dust from those West Virginia hills rode in their wide-open nostrils and stuck to their squeeze-box lungs. Red dust, working its devilment, he observed to himself, but he shut his mouth. They were not his horses. Medicine Ed led his own horse round the corner of the shed row. What was the name of this animal? If he had heard it, Medicine Ed didn't recall. It was a big red 3-year-old, dumb as dirt. The Zeno had vanned up for the fourth race, a maiden without a scratch on it. A van ride on race day did for many a horse, but this boy had rolled out the van as calm as that puddle yonder, for he felt good and didn't know nothing. True, he had no class. He was the throwaway kind, a heavy-head sprinter who looked like a quarter horse with a chest like a car radiator. He must not know what was coming, for once he was sore. He might last to age 5 with luck. How long would Medicine Ed last? He had been on the racetrack since he was 8 years old. After 64 years of this racetrack life, he too was sore and tired. And like the boll weevil in the song, he was looking for a home. He knew he would always have work long as he could work. But where was it wrote that he had to rub horses till the day he died? And as for the medicine he could do, and which long ago gave him his name, best folks forgot about that. And in these parts so far, they had.
That's great. It's Bruce McPherson reading from the book he published, Lord of Misrule by Jamie Gordon. The speaker, the narrator, is such a great voice in this book. It is so incredibly entertaining. Did you anticipate that this would be a national bestseller, Bruce?
Well, no. No, I was just trying to get the books. Jamie Gordon was my first author 35 years before.
Okay.
And so I had done a novel called Champ of the City Solo, which was her first novel. And then we remained friends, and I expected her to go out in the world and, have bigger publishers. In fact, when I published that book, I thought it was going to be the only book I would ever publish. It was just going to be a one-off for me. And it was too much fun, and I got involved in publishing with that. Jamie went on to write a couple of other books that were published, and she did some translations. And but with this fourth novel of hers, she ran into some bad luck. Her agent couldn't sell it. I don't think she really knew how to sell it, and she abandoned Jamie to the winds. Jamie really put it in the bottom drawer for 10 years. I'd read the manuscript because she sent it as a friend, and I thought, well, this is a shame because it really is a good book and it deserves to be published. And I nagged her about it for a while, and she said, well, she wasn't too happy with it and it wasn't finished. And after a period of time, about 10 years, I finally sort of said, I think we need to publish this book. And she said, okay, if I don't find anybody else, you can do it. And I think that was because she felt, well, it wasn't done and it wasn't finished, and she really just wasn't ready for it. But I took her at her word, and when the nomination form for the National Book Award arrived in the mail, I looked at it and I saw that there were a couple of judges on the fiction panel who I thought knew her work. And so I went ahead and sent out an application. And then I told her. And that got her to finish the book. She rewrote the first 50 pages, and it was, fantastic. But I thought that was as far as it was going to go. I had no idea that it would even be shortlisted, much less win the prize. And that was beyond any expectation. So it was, it was.
What a story. You're like the dream publisher. You have like the soul of the publisher who is so generous but yet knows what's good. That's a great story, Bruce. So was Jamie involved in when you first started publishing? Is this before you created McPherson and Company as an entity?
Well, yes, I met her. She was a grad student, and I was an undergrad at Brown. And she was in the creative writing department, and we took a class together, a poetry class. And so that's how I met her in this poetry class. And I realized quite quickly that she was the best writer at the school. She showed me some of her work. And then after I graduated and she had finished her book, despite several authors famous, somewhat famous authors presenting her work to publishers in New York. She couldn't get her book published. And so I said, well, don't despair. We'll do it. I know how to do this because I'd been involved in a small press before, and I knew something about book design and things like that. So anyway, that was the result. We published that first book together.
Right.
And
But you've had the press since '74. There it is.
right. It was initially called Treacle Press, and it was sort of a joke between us that we shared. And
You like treacle as in molasses and
exactly,
okay.
exactly, yeah. Well, that was the time when small presses had crazy names,
right?
And there were, lots of them. But it was just the beginning of the proliferation, you might say, in the early 70s for the small press world to blossom into prominence. There was not the same kind of drifting in between that you find today. There are some rather large, important small presses. I'm not very large. But I'll take a little bit of importance anyway. They have undertaken a lot of the really sort of prestige writing that used to be the purview of the big commercial houses, but less and less today, I think.
Bruce, you state on the website, etc., that you're also you produce art books and combination books of poetry and art, and I'm interested in the production. You say you use acid-free paper. Your book construction is very thoughtful. Could you just briefly talk about that? How you produce your books?
My philosophy is basically, if I'm going to publish a book, I want it to be a permanent object. And so my feeling is, if it's worth your time, I should make it easy for you to read. It should be well designed. It should not be an eyesore on the coffee table. And you should find it. The principle of book design, typography, is it should be invisible. That is, it should make it that whatever the text is, you should make it possible to read it without having it draw attention to itself. But there are a lot of different typefaces that can be used at for various kinds of texts, and so you just after you do it for a while, you just learn. Partly by imitation, you just go to the best examples of design that you can find. And in addition to which, I, along the way, learned production and also made friends with a number of designers that sort of became mentors. In particular, one named Paul Bacon.
That's like your motto is great books for great readers. So there's a lot of respect for the reader there. Thank you, Bruce. You're listening to Planet Poet Words in Space on WIOX Community Radio, live and local in the Catskills. I'm your host, Sharon Israel, here with my guest, Bruce McPherson, the founding director of McPherson and Company, a literary and arts publishing house. Now joining us from Manhattan is Planet Poet's Poet at Large, Pushcart Prize-nominated poet and visual artist Pamela Monche Pierce is focused on moving inventory, a term she learned on Shark Tank, by organizing and sending out completed work. Hi, Pamela.
Hello, Sharon. Hello, Bruce. As always, I'm having a wonderful time being a listener, and I have to switch gears. I noted you mentioned more than one best-selling author, especially John Smith, and it's always interesting to know where are they now. The poet that I'm going to talk about today was also a best-selling poet in his time. He sold 350,000 copies of his book in the 1940s. and was a star. All sorts of interesting things happened to him. His name is Walter Benton. He wrote 2 books, This Is My Beloved and Never a Greater Need. And most people have never heard from him. But Walter Benton inspired me profoundly at 2 different times in my life, 60 years apart. When I was a teenager, and I fell in love with poetry, I was surrounded by girlfriends who all wanted to get married and have suburban lives with 3 kids and a dog, etc. But I didn't want that, and I didn't know what I wanted. So in my poetry travels, I discovered Walter Benton. So when they were talking at slumber parties about pine paneled kitchens and dogs and children, I was reading things like this. This is from As the Night Whitens into Day, from Never a Greater Need. Ah, darling, as the night whitens into day, we have loved and slept, bathed and returned to one another, marveling at the wondrous things we are. All your incomparable body laughs to my touch, opens like the roses upon which warm rain has fallen. Oh, there is no drink like the cup your kisses fill. There is no peace like the sleep shaped by our love's
Wow.
violence. So I knew deep in my heart that I was a very passionate romantic life that was sexy and focused, and being with a guy who bored me, not dragging somebody to the altar. And I discovered Walter Benton. Someone described his work as like a Chagall painting where he's in love and floating in air, and his heart is over here and his head is over there. 60 years later, when the pandemic happened, the art school that I went to, where I had worked in the studio there for years, closed down. And we went to Zoom classes with my late and wonderful instructor, Mariano Del Rosario. And we were all making art in our kitchens and our bathrooms and using whatever we could get our hands on. And one of the things that struck me was that everybody was talking about the separation of people, not being able to be close to each other. And they were focusing on grandparents and grandchildren a lot. And I was thinking, what about lovers who are separated and can't touch each other and can't have any contact? Walter Benton had written most of his poetry, or much of it, when he was overseas during World War II, and very much in love with a woman here in Brooklyn, actually. And he wrote these very passionate diary entries, which became his books of poetry. So as I was thinking about this, and I was making collages in my kitchen, the term skin hunger came to mind. And skin hunger is a legitimate term that was coined in the 1950s to describe what happens to infants. So skin hunger is a legitimate term, and these infants fail to thrive. I actually saw them. It was so heartbreaking. I was in a volunteer project at the Foundling Hospital long ago, and I saw people come in and dressed, in work clothes. They had come from their office, and they sat down, and they just held babies. They held these infants to give them skin contact. So the term skin hunger became the title for a series of collages, which I did. And Walter Benton, after many years of not thinking about him, Walter Benton popped into my head as I was working on this series. And I will read you an excerpt from his diary entry on the eve of 1947, which I used as a text background in one of my collages. With 4 and some years lost, playing war, cancel another. Cross out a year of seasons, of nights and mornings, a wasted year, of radio and movie evenings, Sundays of pointless solitaire, and this, the richest of our expectant time, with youth enough still to be strong and years just right to be wiser than we really are, and never a greater need for the therapy of love. So I called one of the collages Never a Greater Need. So Walter Benton came to my rescue twice in my life. That's perfect. It was perfect. All of this separation of lovers and the longing, the profound longing, and is this going to be over? And when is it going to be over? So as I've been looking at Walter Benton again for the show today, I've decided that I'm going to, in October, when I'm on the show again, I want to talk about his biography. Very, very interesting life. Strange and wonderful things happened for him. And I think that will be an interesting show too. So,
Great.
so thank you for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. Can you give us Walter Benton's dates again?
He was born in 1904 and he died in 1976.
Okay. Thank you, Pamela Moshe Pierce, poet at large.
My pleasure.
That was so interesting. Come back.
Okay, we'll see you in October. We'll hear you in October.
Okay.
Bye.
Bruce, you've published poets who write poetry and prose, and I was struck by something you said. Prose has been my focus for the 50 years I've been at this, but the sort of prose that's written by poets, that is prose fiction, attentive to heightened expressive possibilities, and not surprisingly, such prose is more often than not written by poets. And I found that the excerpts that Bruce McPherson, I didn't introduce you again by your full name, the prose you read is very distinctive and the two pieces in very different ways. But you also have a relationship with a very famous Hudson Valley poet, Robert Kelly. You're going to read a couple of pieces, one now and one at the end of the show. Hopefully we have time for that. Would you introduce the piece that you're going to read by Robert Kelly and just give us a little introduction to the man himself, the poet himself?
Oh, well,
I know it's a tall order.
It is, because Robert has been an active, important poet since the early 1960s, and was just recently retired professor at Bard College.
Bard, yeah.
For all of the time in between. So I don't know how to. Robert, as one other poet remarked to me, can do anything. And he has. He's written about 80 books of poetry and prose and plays and criticism. He is someone who writes every single day. He writes as breathing. And he writes at an extraordinarily high level. I came to know him probably about 1987. 78, 79. And we were introduced by a mutual friend, the artist Carol A. Schneemann. Although I did a little bit, one book of his poetry to start with. Instead, I moved to his prose because there are so many poetry presses, and he was being published by Blacksboro Press and other presses, that I felt I'll just, I was more interested in prose anyway. And he offered fictions that and he called them fictions rather than short stories.
Yeah, that's a great word, fictions. That's very different.
And and he could write fiction in practically any genre, a ghost story, a western, a travelogue. And so I've done 5 volumes of his short fictions and collected them all into a Kindle volume. So that they're all available. The one I'm going to read is the one that I usually use as my test. When people at a book fair ask, well, what's his stuff like? I hand them this because it's a 2-page story. I think it's a very surprising story. It draws you in, and suddenly you're in an entirely different world or realm. It's a little bit visionary. It helps to know a little bit about, Milton and Paradise Lost, but it's not necessary. It's filled with irony. Perhaps I should just read it now. It's called The New Fruit. It was the day in the long calendar when each person was allowed to design a new fruit. My turn was soon to come, and I was trying to turn my mind away from an alluring image of a cluster of soft blue elongated pods, like stubby plantains, fat fingers growing on a small hand. These were clearer in outer than in inner view. That fact alone, and that I had not built the fruit up from its innermost point, medicinal value, or its proximal inner, taste, had persuaded me that I had fallen for an obvious trope. In essence, spray painting a hand of bananas blue. No benefit in that. Soon the Flamans would be looking over their ivory scrollwork desktops at me, their eyes merely curious, their minds ready to binominalize, categorize, and lexicalize the new fruit my mind would take from itself and offer, first time in the world, to them. Yet I, like some fructometer, like each fructometer, would suppose in that mere, I insist, limpid curiosity, a certain element of amusement, disdain, even sarcasm, as if it fell to them to mock what it fell to others, on this one day of the long year to propose. We live on a bridge over an unceasing river, dangerous the water, full of monsters and uncertain destinations. Should it be blue at all? Blue had come first in my mind, tasteless in every sense of blue fruit. This violation of the color code itself should have shown me that my thoughts were random and unformed. What was the matter with me today? A fruit is its consequences, its taste, its texture, its capacity to dissemble the infancy of the seed, its rind, its heft to the hand of the planetary types who hold it, its color before the sun. I knew the text as well as anyone, and yet I was within a few moments of blurting out, "Let there be a blue fruit, its carpels swollen like sausages, its inner custardy and yum, with a taste to follow." What a gaffe! What a shame I would have been to my section. Yet someday a fruit could be designed, could it not, should it not, from the outside in? But now the Flamen addressed me. "Lucifer, what is your pleasure?" And I mumbled, "Something small, reddish, roundish, no special taste, a bit mealy. The seeds will be protected over the coldest winter in third-grade planets. Little seeds, pointy at one end, not too harmful if an animal swallows, a slight astringency in the flesh of the fruit, a slight caustic flavor to the rind. Call it what you please. Someday I will shape a lovely thing to suit myself, tint the light dark, or taste the glitter alone of things, taste the inner pulp of color, and know my blue fruit into the world."
Wow. That's Bruce McPherson reading Robert Kelly's The New Fruit from the book called Doctor of Silence, which is kind of ironic anyway, but this is not very silent. And it's also, he was one of the creators along with Rauschenberg of the deep image. And the image is so inside, he concentrates on this image of this fruit. It's completely x-rayed and worshipped in a way. It was great. Thank you, Bruce. But I love the word, and thank you for pronouncing it, fructometer. And Kelly invents his own words.
Right.
So that's like what a tremendous personality. This hour is flying by, and I wanted to thank you so much for that. I wanted you to introduce and read from Lindsay Hill's Sea of Hooks, which is one of the most celebrated fiction debuts of recent years, according to what has been written about it. It won numerous awards, and Lindsay Hill is a poet writing prose, and he was also a banker. But I was so intrigued by the excerpts you sent to me, one which is a poem, and then there were prose poems following it. So could you just would you give us a small introduction and just read the poem and one or two, maybe one of the prose poems?
Okay, that's a little bit of a tall order, but I'll do my best.
Okay.
So, Lindsay was a precocious poet. He published his first book while still in college. It was published by Oyez Press in San Francisco. He went on to write 5 more. But about 30 years ago, he took a trip to Bhutan with another poet, Nathaniel Tarn. When he came back, he found that, and this was a time when Bhutan was closed to almost all outsiders. So it was a special trip, and he found himself kind of transformed, and he's just started writing down everything that was coming into him. It was sort of like he was channeling from some other source, and he wrote and wrote and wrote, night or day, whenever it struck him. He had other jobs, although he did stop being a banker when he got back from Bhutan, and moved back to the West Coast. He was originally from San Francisco. He was very attentive, but he just collected all of these little pieces of thoughts and ideas and scenarios that occurred to him without any idea of what they would be or what they might be worth. He just collected them, and he wound up with about 5,000 pieces. And at a certain point, he felt as though that was enough, and so he started trying to put them into some sort of formal shape. He worked on that for about 10 years. During those 10 years, he made 9 different versions of a book. They ranged from 100 pages to 1,000 pages. When he came to me, thanks to another poet, a mutual friend of ours, Clayton Eshelman, he had whittled it down to about a 400-page manuscript containing about 1,000 of those pieces that he had edited and rewritten and formed into a kind of a novel. But it was a very special novel in that these pieces are each titled, and they're out of order, you might say. I mean, there are threads throughout the book, but in fact, as a reader, you more or less put the story together as you read them, because each one is sort of a self-contained image or a self-contained event. It tells the story of a young man who is himself in pieces. He's suffered a difficult childhood and certain other traumas, and so he goes on a journey himself, not surprisingly, to Bhutan, as you eventually learn, and he is on a search for his true self. It's got a little bit of a Siddhartha aspect to it, right? So Herman Hesse. Anyway, it wasn't until he found the first piece that serves as the poem, the opening poem. He rebroke it into lines, and so the book begins with this little preliminary poem. I'll just read it. A boy grew up beside a sea of hooks, and he learned to swim in that sea, and to notice the hooks as they rose and fell and twisted in the tides. And he learned to feel his way, at first very slowly, in the sea of hooks. And he noticed that all around him, people had hooks in their skin and were being pulled in many directions. And many of the hooks were small and hard to see, barely silver in the glinting light down deep barely visible, and numerous. And some, from the place of his birth, would not put a toe in that sea, and some lived their entire lives full of hooks in the underneath.
Mm.
I'll read two little pieces because they are like little prose poems. And the first one, it has to be said, is a little harsh. It's a little difficult. It's the first one in the book. It's called Glass. This is an introduction to the trauma that he feels, and it spurs the book onward. But the book is not filled with just this. It's filled with a lot of comedy, a lot of philosophy, a lot of the inner life of this character, Christopher Westall. Glass. Of the great Victorian Conservatory in Golden Gate Park, known formerly as the Hall of Flowers, Christopher Westall's mother had once said, "This is a place where glass is safe." For some reason, he thought of this first on finding her body. The plastic bag fitted so snugly over her face. He held her hand a while there in the cold. It felt reef stiff. Her eyes were closed. She had somehow managed to tuck herself in quite tightly. Her face was soft, expressionless, and tired. No hint of how it had been for her to die. There, on the bed in his room, the bed under which he once thought knife people slept. And the second one I'll read is Other people's dreams. When Christopher was a child, he had dreams some nights that were not his own, dreams filled with people he didn't know, places he'd never been, and circumstances that were unfamiliar to him. Christopher called this having other people's dreams. So those are the two.
I said they're very unsettling.
Yes, they are.
Very nightmarish.
A little bit, yes.
Yeah, they're wonderful. We're going to end with Bruce McPherson reading one more of Robert Kelly's fictions. And this is from the fairy tale book. Is that right, Bruce?
That's correct. Yeah. This is from Shadow Talk, 25 New Fairy Tales, that was brought out a couple of years ago. And its title is The Fox and the Other Side. For several years, there was a fox's den behind our summer house. A fox's house, I should say, because the den was home to a red fox at some times, a black fox at others. I had never seen a black fox. I used to sit screened in, sprawled in a big old armchair, safe from the mosquitoes of eventide, insistent as church bells. I wanted to see the black fox close up, but never managed to do so. Only when I was far across the lawn would he appear, moving slow enough for me to see him clearly, but not too clear. Anyhow, I liked the red fox better. It was a real foxy fox, color of marmalade, color of cream, with a sly gait and a furtive glance here and there. He knew how to be a fox, looking like a 4-foot version of any high school student slouching home. I read up on foxes and found that there were black foxes, green foxes, and blue foxes, as well as the ordinary kind they called rufous, though red would do well enough. Quote, "These are," I read in a big nature book, quote, "the foxes of the other side. Watch out for them. When they appear, they sometimes seize the territory of the rufous or common fox. There are known instances, furthermore, where the apparition of a black fox has heralded or perhaps even induced changes in the visual apparatus of human spectators, so that ever after one color seems suddenly much, as one patient described it, louder than before, louder than it ought to be. Such examples of chromatic peril are not uncommon in the tropics, but rarer in North America. The next time I saw the black fox, I closed my eyes right away and called out to him, 'Why do you change our eyes?' To my surprise, he answered lucidly in an accent that reminded me of a friend of my wife from Slovenia. 'I change you to make you see the other side. That's where I come from and where you are going. Get ready.' After silence, I opened my eyes. No fox. I walked over to the summer house, over grass that seemed preposterously green.
That's The Fox and the Other Side by Robert Kelly, read by the publisher of that piece, Bruce McPherson. Bruce, thank you so much for a great show. Would you tell us where we may find more information about McPherson and Company?
I would say the website's the best place. That's www.mcphersonco, McPhersonco.com.
Well, I'm a fan. Thank you so much, Bruce, and thank you, Marche Pierce and Bruce McPherson, for a great show, and thank you all for listening.